Welcome, guys, to another JMC Live. I am your host, Jeremy Caverly. We're just getting things set up for tonight, wanting to make sure that everything's coming through here clearly on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome, couple of viewers on our wonderful YouTube, and welcome on Facebook. I don't know if you noticed the last couple of shows, we've had some troubles with what's happened getting the YouTube and the Facebook to connect. But hopefully tonight, this will actually work really good. This is probably the best and the quickest setup I've had without having to restart it. Because that was the fear. There was always this issue with the Facebook and YouTube connecting. So tonight, this is about, as you saw the title, Little is Much in God's Hands. And Miranda found a story that she was going to share. And we've known since yesterday that she was quite sick. We discussed tonight, should she not? And the debate went back and forth, yes or no, yes or no. And as you can see, she's not here tonight. She's actually in bed in this moment. So you pray for her, pray for us, because there's a lot of warring factions on, struggling. We're wanting to do more, but we know we can't. But then again, we can, but we can't. Frustrations and anger, different things that, emotions that come out dealing with these kinds of situations. So keep us in prayer as we go through this season right now again. So tonight, like I said, Miranda found this story and she shared it with her family, and I'm going to share it with you tonight. And there's some different verses that we're going to cover in this, and then we'll probably sing a few songs as well. This is a story about Hattie Mae Wyatt. Now, the story has been talked about in different ways and different mannerisms on what is and what isn't about who she is and what she's about. But this little girl born in the 1800s in 1877 on the 16th of May in Philadelphia, of all places, and she died age 6. And she's buried in the Longview Cemetery in Rockledge, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. This is actually from the Find the Grave website. This is the actual information. You can find her plot in the Susquehanna Lawn, section 76, grave 7, and memorial ID. You can actually pull this up. The links are on the YouTube, and I'll need to put them on the Facebook here after a bit. But this story is about 57 cents. So let's share this story with you now. So Hattie had this inspiring moment of charity, and hopefully you can read along. I want you to see this. According to Temple University founder Russell Conwell, Hattie Mae was the student in a church Sunday school, and many students, including herself, could not attend because it was just really tiny. So, finding Hattie outside, Conwell brings her inside and says, maybe one day, I surely hope, the building will fit all the children in the area. So, once Hattie heard about this, she ends up saving her pennies to make this happen. And the story says that she dies, and a small purse is found under her pillow containing 57 cents. Because she wanted, the school to fit all the children. So at the funeral, her mom gives the money to Conwell, and he takes it to the church, tells the story. And the first gifts towards the new Sunday school building, he changed the money into pennies, which he offered for sale. They were sold for $250, and almost all the pennies returned to him as well. The $250 was then changed into pennies and sold enough to buy property for the school, inspired by Hattie Mae's generosity. Congregation not only built the bigger Sunday school, but an entire new church. The Wyatt Mite Society was named for her managing to raise the money against all odds, and the church was built right on Broad Street. The owner purchased the lot for the church, accepted Hattie's pennies as the first down payment on the property, and it was called Grace Baptist Church. It became known as the Temple. And out of this, bought with Hattie's pennies, the Temple University became next. So Conwell declared that this congregation of thousands was born out of Hattie's small investment. He said, she is happy on high with the thought that her life was so full, that it was so complete, that she lived really to be so old in the influence as she grew upon this earth. So a little more about her. And she's the daughter of Joseph and Harriet Hattie J. Ball White. They lived at 1917 Marvane Street in Philadelphia. She died of diphtheria at age 7, which her younger sister also contracted and died 5 days later. They originally were buried in the Monument Cemetery, Section E, Lot 251, Grave 4N, but were moved within the cemetery, Section B, Lot 434, Grave 4S, on May 11th, 1904. 2 years later, their grandmother, Abby P. Ball, was buried with them. Monument was closed in 1956. And on June 22nd of that year, Annie and Hattie Mae were removed for a second time, along with Abby, were buried at Longview Cemetery, where the grave is marked by a ball plaque. The church Hattie inspired to be built now functions as the Temple Performing Arts Center. It's an amazing landmark. And the church still exists, known as the Grace Baptist Church of Bluebell. So think about this for a minute. 57 cents. What would 57 cents buy you in the 80s? Well, 57 cents is probably around the same amount of taxes that could buy you a candy bar about 1980, 1995 possibly. You could also get one can of soda in the 80s. But back then, 57 cents in the 1800s was a lot of money. And think about how long she saved all this money. Now let's look at some Bible verses that kind of line up with her story, that inspired a school and a church and a university. 57 cents. Let's go to Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. This is the widow's offering that we're talking about here. So Jesus sits down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but the poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So Jesus tells this story about the widow, and thinking about Hattie's story of 57 cents. Can you think about a time in your own personal life? And I know I can, and many of you are going to already know what I'm about to say. But before I say the one you probably think, I'm going to go back to my own childhood. And I think about what my mother and my grandmother, who were both disabled, receiving Social Security checks, how they would spend all year couponing and gathering, Kool-Aid points or, other kind of points, because in the 80s you could gather a lot of points from buying cereals and different things. I remember one year she gathered a bunch, and I think she had to pay like $12.95 for shipping, and I got an Atari jacket. I think that was my 6th birthday. And she saved up all year for that, to get that money, because she was on a fixed income. This is before you really got help with, water and sewer and gas and electric. And I'm kind of reminded about what happened. And then fast forward to when my mom left and it was just me and my grandmother. And I was in band class and I needed reeds. My grandmother had to do the same thing with her small check. She saved up for 5 months. So I had enough to buy 2 reeds for band class. So Hattie's story is very similar to this story here with the widow's offering. in my own personal life. Now let's go to John chapter 6. John chapter 6. So that one before. So John chapter 6. When you turn to John chapter 6, we're going to start on the first verse. John chapter 6. John chapter 6. It says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" And he asked this only to test him, for he had already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for everyone to have a bite." Now, before we go any further, 57 cents. The 2 fishes and loaves. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let there be nothing be wasted. So eat to the bone." And that reminds me, my mom and my grandmother teaching me to eat chicken wings and fried chicken, and you literally eat it to the bone. And sadly enough, I've been in cafeterias and different places, and I've seen people not eat to the bone. And I think about this, that Jesus commands people to eat to where there's nothing left. Fill them up. So again, back at verse 7 again. It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for everyone to have a bite. And then another of his disciples, Simon Peter's brother, speaks up and says, "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and he did the same with the fish. Verse 12 again. When they had had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let there be nothing wasted." And why am I reading this twice? Because think about this. Jesus didn't have to repeat himself twice, did he? He gave the command. His disciples listened. Gather the people. So here's the most interesting piece about it. It's not just the fact that he fed so many people. It's the fact that also gather pieces that are left over. I'm like, do what? Gather pieces that are left over? Let there be nothing wasted. So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. So not only did he feed the people there, they had food to carry with them. And after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Again, what can you do with 57 cents? What can you do with 2 fishes and 5 loaves? What can you do with a Social Security check and you need to buy reeds for your grandson? Or buy food, like my mother and grandmother had to do? My whole life, was food stamps and Medicaid and my mother and grandma's Social Security checks until my mom got married in junior high. But then when she left, I really didn't see that money my stepdad made. It was spent on beer and cigarettes for a majority of it. But imagine what you can do in that situation. Or like my other story, which many of you already know about. What did I do when I was homeless? I had to walk to work from 323 Moody Street at Godtel Ministries all the way to Casa Olay in Lufkin, Texas. I also worked at many other, day labor jobs, and I had about 50 some odd jobs between that January and June before I left because people would show up at the shelter every day. So before I got that job for a week or so that I worked at Motel 6, before I took the job at Casa Olay, I had different day labor jobs. I was doing plumbing, I did roofing, I did tree trimming, I did edging, I did maintenance, I did ground maintenance, I did drywall, I mowed grass. I was sent to someone's house to pack boxes. And most people still today don't believe that. But if you're at a homeless shelter, there are day labor people, and some of them are companies, and some of them are just generous people who show up between the hours of 8 and 10 a.m. and offer you work until you can find a permanent solution. Or some people just took that, stayed for a couple of months, and moved out. So I learned a lot in those periods. Just like we're learning about Hattie. 57 cents. Again, as I said earlier, 57 cents in the 80s and the early 90s would buy you, a candy bar, a Snickers, a Payday, Reese's. You like soda? It'd buy you one soda. But in the 1800s, 57 cents was a lot more money. This would be kind of equivalent to stories today of children, that raise, $50, $100, and then pass away the following day, and then that money's given to a foundation or a ministry or something like that. There's other inspiring stories today of children raising money for homeless and doing missions work and cleaning and making hats and scarves and different kinds of things like that. But as we go back in history to Hattie, the girl from Philadelphia, you have a generational history here of something that can inspire you, something that can transform your life. But the question you got to ask, are you willing to do it? Now, I know many of us don't, in this time of coronavirus, we don't have a whole lot. Some of us have a lot more than what we can even imagine. Other of us have complete uncertainty and unknowing what they're going to do with their lives, how they're going to operate, where they're going to go, what they're going to do, and how they're going to get there. And I can't tell you, how easy it was for Hattie to save 57 cents. I can't tell you that it was a simplistic, easy moment. I wouldn't think it was. There's things she had to sacrifice. The only other example I personally have that I'd have to say that I'd have like this would be when I was at the Salvation Army at the Houston Adult Rehabilitation Center in the year 2001 and 2002. And they would build a transitional facility next door. I was asked if I wanted, because I was already a graduate of the 6 and 9 month program, I was asked, Jeremy, do you want to move in the transitional facility? You can go to college. Jeremy, you can become a Salvation Army officer. And they sent me to North Carolina. They sent me to Atlanta, Georgia. And I went and met training officers. And I almost became a soldier and was going to join the Salvation Army Southern Territory and go to officer candidate school. But something inside me said, it's not time. That's not your path. So all the other graduates, I encouraged them to move into the transitional facility while I stayed a lot longer, to the point that the security team that was there at the front desk, the resident supervisors, the counselors, other employees, Salvation Army officers, candidates in between, all different places between there and Aldine, Westfield, and everywhere else in between. Jeremy, why don't you leave? Was a reoccurring conversation for a good 3.5 months or longer. And I had this overloaded burden of feeling I needed to stay to help the men and women that were within my area. Because there was also a domestic violence shelter that I was graciously allowed to communicate with the women. I was also able to go to the Boys and Girls Club and the Aldine Westfield, so I would go on a Sunday morning to the Salvation Army, be in the choir or sing on my own, and then go with one of the men that played the piano and go to Aldine Westfield and do another service there. And help with all various kinds of meetings, even though I wasn't an addict. And you're like, what does this got to do with 57 cents? I could have moved into that transitional facility. I could have sat in one of those houses. I gave up my slot for someone else. More than once. I was on the top of the list for almost 6 months. And every time they'd ask me, every day, I'd say, no, you choose this person. You let them go. Their lives are more important. They're the ones that need the help more than me. And then I'm reminded of after the Salvation Army, being in the U.S. Coast Guard and being stationed at Point Reyes. And my roommate at the time, his name is Paris Trimmingham. Pretty cool guy from Arizona. He would move out and I'd have the apartment to myself. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-story townhouse. And I'd get new roommates. And eventually I'd get put on the top of the list to move out of government housing for the military on military base. To go out into the public sector and get an apartment. And for well over almost a year, I kept saying no. And I'd be asked daily, weekly, bi-weekly. It changed. Jeremy, did you find an apartment yet? And the answer would always be no. I'm reminded of a young guy. His name is Pullen. And he had a relationship with somebody. And he needed to move out. But he already been there less than a year. And normally you had to stay there over a year or more and move up on the list. And he was several behind us. And I convinced our leadership he needed to move out before I did. I was fine. It's the same situation. It just isn't money. You got to think about this 57 cents beyond just a monetary gain. It's not just about always money. If you have a problem about money, then look at what else that you have that's like 57 cents. Is it an opportunity like what I had? Jeremy, do you want to be promoted? No. Jeremy, do you want to move out of government housing? No. Jeremy, do you want to move into a transitional facility? No. Do you want to go here? No. Sometimes your no and you recommending somebody else to do something is your 57 cent story. Maybe you can put in a good word about somebody else. That's your 57 cents. Or the coined phrase today, that's just my 2 cents. Or maybe you just don't say anything at all. You have an opportunity to fill out a survey and you just decide, well, it's better to not fill out the survey at all, not say anything at all, positive or negative. You're content with where you are. You don't. Or maybe you need to fill out a survey and give someone a perfect score. As an act of humility. As an act of serving the Lord. As we talked about before, about servants, those that are in last place can be first, and those in first that should be last. Hattie's story has inspired people all over the world. Now, your story in your life may never be heard by anyone else in the rest of the world. And in many cases, servanthood and humility is about doing things to not get selfish gain. It's not about you. And we now live in a social media, overloaded media market where people are taking pictures of giving food to the homeless, and they're giving clothes to the homeless and shoes to the homeless, and the one giving the shoes or whatever, they're taking pictures for their own gain. And what happens? It takes away the power of what God can do. So you have to be very careful with what you do when you do this servant act of giving money. Some of you will be told when you fill out your taxes to don't claim it as a tax write-off. You don't want the whole world to know what you're doing. Of course, people can, get access to your financial transactions. The government, the law enforcement, and things of those nature can pull a report of how you spent your money. People can get a report of your taxes. Miranda and I had a conversation earlier this week, and we were talking about becoming too big to fail. And we talked about various ministries and businesses and different people. And we're not going to mention their names because we don't want to humiliate those that have already been put in the public sector and been humiliated already. But we discussed this privately, people's names, businesses and ministries by name, and said, what can we learn from these situations? What can we learn from what has been gained or what has been lost? Businesses and ministries destroyed because of financial problems or other issues. And the question we asked ourselves was, why didn't we become a profit or a non-profit? The other question was, why don't we, get an office and have a lot of employees? And, why aren't we, writing a lot of books? And yes, I am working on a book, but why have I not, published many books? And why am I not involved with all these other ministries? And why am I not doing this? The question of why and how and all these things kept going and going and going. And the repeated phrase was, we didn't want to become too big to fail. There's a bigger underlying current in this story of 57 cents. Or the widow's story. Or the fish and loaves. The Coast Guard has coined the phrase to do more with less. And others have used it too. And even Jesus says you can do a lot more with less. And other times he says, oh yes, we need to be really abundant, and you need to have more, and you need to prosper, and you need to, grow and gain and have wealth and all these different things. But in these certain acts of servanthood, in these certain acts of moments of your life, what happens? When you give all that you can possibly give. Stories of people giving the last bit of money. The rich man giving away everything. Hattie's 57 cents. My own personal stories. And I know many of you probably have them. If you're an adult in your mid-20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you can think of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your parents, possibly, of doing something that was a sacrifice so that you could have clothes, or you could have food, or maybe a toy, or helped you get a car, or maybe, they didn't help you and you pulled yourself up from the bootstraps, as they say, and you bought your own car. You went to school on your own. You worked 4 jobs, like my aunt could share. And you moved on your own and you became somebody and you did something with your life. This story of 57 cents will be repeated in your life every year in so many different ways. How you spend your money, how you spend your time, what are you reading, what are you talking about, how are you financially giving, how are you serving, how are you communicating about somebody else. Now, I know many people can't say they've had a 2 fishes, 5 loaves story. Food miraculously multiplied out of nothing. Or that story about the oil in the jar that just never went dry. But they say if you can save a few cents or $1 every week, if you saved $1 every week, there's 52 weeks in a year, there's $52. To do things like this would require not getting a cup of Starbucks. It requires going to a thrift store and buying used clothes. You want video games? You might have to go to GameStop and trade and get a used game, or go without something. But if you're one of those like me when I was younger and you didn't have anything else you could really save, you couldn't turn off anything really else, you had your, especially like when I was homeless, I didn't buy new things, I just had what was at the shelter. So if I had money and I had to buy, lunch for myself, and a lot of the money I had, I spent on the ministry to go to South Africa and on to Honor Academy. But if you're not in an extreme situation where you don't have that money, or maybe you are the one that doesn't, again, saving money is not the whole context of this story. I don't want you to get confused. Money is one piece of it, but again, it's about your time. It's about your service. It's about your servanthood, your leadership, your sacrifice, your prosperity, your positivity in your life and the lives of others. What you say could break somebody and destroy them for a long time. What you don't say and you bite your tongue could save someone's life. So there's so many different variants of how this story goes. And I want you to understand tonight that God has a calling in your life tonight where He wants to help you. He wants to guide you to a new place in the realm of what God has to transform your life into a blessing to others. I want you to understand that your 57 cents has not been in vain. Your 2 fishes and 5 loaves will multiply. How you operate as a man, woman, child, husband, wife, single, married, divorced, widowed, widower, is important. And God will guide you and direct you through these paths. God will help you in your storm in your life so that your 57 cents could transform your family, your friends, your co-workers, your city, your state, and transform your country.